Every scroll trains your brain. Every swipe weakens your focus. Digital fatigue isn't just personal, it's a leadership risk. It kills clarity, presence, and conviction. So, before you hit play, check in. Are you listening by habit or by intention? Because how you show up here is how you lead out there. I'm Charles. At On a Quest, we partner with investors to design leadership programs for executives that don't just check boxes, but change actual behavior. This podcast, Everyone is a Leader, exists to support sharpening the way you lead. Because whether you plan it or not, you're shaping culture through what you say, what you ignore, what you reward, what you tolerate. Leadership is constant. The question is, are you doing it by default or by design? Each episode follows a clear structure. 1, the leader's journey, the human story behind the title. 2, a breakthrough conversation, one leadership challenge we explore live. 3, key takeaways, insights you can apply directly. My guest today is Dr. Nafis Hamid, a cognitive scientist and field researcher whose work reads like a geopolitical thriller. He scans the brain of extremists, negotiates with radicalized individuals, and investigates how identity and belief systems drive human behavior. He's the Research and Policy Director of Accept, based at the Department of War Studies at King's College London, and advises governments around the world on preventing political violence, negotiating conflicts, and peace building. Nafis, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
As you're stepping into this new format for you, how are you approaching this conversation?
Well, it's going to be interesting. I've never talked about my role as a leader. So it's going to be a novel experience, and I am curious to see what I'm going to say.
All right, let's get to it.
All right.
So tell us, Nafis, about your current role and responsibilities.
So I'm the Research and Policy Director of a very large research project called Accept, which is part of a consortium of research programs. We're based at King's College London, and we're funded by the UK Foreign Office. It's a behavioral science research project that looks at pathways to peace versus violence in fragile and conflict-affected states. So we have data collection going on in South Sudan, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq. I just spent 6 weeks in Colombia, where I was meeting with members of FARC and ELN, which is which are leftist guerrilla groups. I met the leader of FARC, Timochenko, and we're trying to just understand why sometimes people go down the pathways of peace versus violence, and we're using longitudinal psychometric surveys, randomized controlled trial studies, qualitative interviews. If you add up everyone who's working on the research project, we're talking over 140 people, basically, around the world. And these are people who are operating in quite dangerous territories. For example, we had our researchers in Syria were collecting data with the lead Syrian group, HTS, and another group called SNA. They were collecting that survey data on understanding people's life histories, psychological surveys about why they had joined this group, why they had left this group. And they were collecting the data up until the day that group made the advance on Damascus and overthrew Bashar al-Assad. So actually, me and my team, we had awareness that this was happening actually before the world even knew about it, because the enumerators were collecting the data and then were informing us we have to stop collecting. They're about to advance on Damascus. So you can understand the sort of scary situation. We have enumerators, data collectors, researchers, I should say, in South Sudan. And right now there's a lot of turmoil going on in South Sudan, and our researchers are being evacuated from there. So it's in addition to just the research and the understanding and the theories and the study design, there's responsibilities that need to be taken into account here that you just never hear of normally in most normal research projects.
How does it feel to hold this responsibility of a team that is at life or death risk?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I should say, first of all, I'm very fortunate that I have a lot of amazing people around me. I have a co-PI, Dr. Fiona McEwen, who is my co-pilot in a lot of this work. And I'm very fortunate to be working with someone who's so capable and competent, and I'm very grateful to have her there with me. Within King's College London, we have a lot of people within the broader consortium. So there's a lot of support, but also means that everybody is sort of a stakeholder as well. You're not just thinking like looking downwards, what's my duty of care to these people on the ground, but you're also looking upwards in terms of if we do something wrong and we create a problem on the ground, this could cause an international crisis, if you will, in the sense of imagine if a Foreign Office funded researcher was kidnapped or held, ransom or sparked some conflict. Think about the diplomatic consequences of that. It's not just a King's College researcher. This is a Foreign Office funded researcher, right? So so even though you're not technically part of the government, your responsibilities are also related to the government. This could create like a presidential prime minister level problem if we do something wrong. So you're thinking upwards as well. At a very international, global, leader-to-leader level, as well as responsibilities of the people on the ground. So, yeah, it's a lot of responsibility.
What have you learned about you, Nafis, as a leader during those past 3 years?
I'm sort of like I guess you could say a reluctant leader, in the sense that that was never part of my identity, that's something I would want to become. I guess the work that I'm most known for is my field work that I did around the world with members of terrorist groups and violent extremist groups, jihadist supporters.
You scan the brain of violent extremists.
Yes. And so even though you're working in teams, there's still this sense of I'm just this autonomous individual, free-floating, freelancing. My responsibilities are to my science, to my ideas. And then all of a sudden, I was sort of thrust into this position. When I started on this project, I was just a regular postdoctoral researcher on the project. And then they asked me, the higher ups, hey, we need you to essentially help take over the project. And I remember when I got the call, I wanted to say no, actually. I was like, I don't want this responsibility. I was like, no, I just want to be the guy doing the work, not the person leading all of it. And so it was stressful when I first got the job because it was an identity shift that needed to happen as well. That I'm going to now have to help lead this team of people and to just take many steps back and allow a lot of other people to be doing a lot of the frontline work while I think more broadly about things. And I think I made a lot of mistakes in the beginning. Some of the mistakes were necessary because the project was not in a good shape and it was falling apart, and I had to come in along with my colleague Fiona, and we had to kind of turn this whole thing around. But I think the big mistake that I made was I was thinking too much like a manager. I was thinking like, okay, I got these finances, I got these people. How do I use the resources? How do I think like a tacticianer to whether I'm thinking about money or projects or individual resources? How do I use these in an efficient way? And that's how I was thinking. And that's maybe part of what a leader needs to think about, but that's not where my talents lie. And there were other people on the project who could actually do that better than me. And it took me a while to realize, why am I doing this thing that I can actually delegate to other people, that other people want to do, that they're better at doing than I am? That's not who I am. If I'm this philosopher, intellectual scientist type of guy, what's the use of those skills? And that's where it sort of dawned on me the difference between someone who's like a COO versus a CEO, right? Which is, how do you think like a visionary? How do you use and harness those skills to think broadly? What are the big ideas that we want to be exploring in this research project? And how can I communicate those ideas to our funders in the Foreign Office, to our partners who are working on the project, to our people, to the immediate team on the ground? I don't need to manage them if I can sell them on the big vision and the big idea. That will motivate them. And then there's other people who can actually do the management stuff much better than I can. I need to actually harness my own skills of big picture thinking and communication, which is also one of my skill sets. So once I was able to make that transition, not only was I able to, I think, contribute more to the overall project, but I was able to step into my natural skill set, which made me feel a lot less stressed out because I was doing the thing that I was actually good at and filling a gap that needed to be filled.
I'm interested into training you went through in probably your teams as well, into preparing you to get kidnapped.
It's called hostile environments awareness training. A lot of people who work in hostile environments go through that training. UN people, even business people will go through that training if they have to go do business in different areas. So the people who run the program are usually mostly former special forces individuals. So in the UK, where I did the training, these are former SAS. SAS is like the elite special forces within the UK. It's what the US Delta Force, which is the most elite force in the US Special Forces, based themselves off of. These are the people who are the instructors have the most insane stories you've ever heard. Like for every scenario they keep telling you like how to come up with a contingency plan, they have an actual personal story. And you keep thinking, listen, I'll never need to use this. And then they tell you a very personal story of how they had to use it. And you're like, okay, wow, these people have really been through a lot.
And so they kidnapped you that day.
Yes, at the end, they give you all the instructions. They tell you everything about how you're supposed to behave if you get kidnapped. And then they put you through a mock kidnapping, which you don't even know when it's going to happen, actually. So you're just kind of going through this thing called a field day where they teach you how to, if you're in a minefield, how you have to get out of a minefield, how to spot mines. And so they test you on your ability to spot where the mines are, how to get out of the minefield. And so they're putting you through all of these different tests throughout the day to be able to detect where the bombs are, everything like that. And then out of nowhere, at some point, the kidnapping happens, and it's supposed to feel like it just comes out of nowhere, essentially, where they come in cars, guns blazing, throw you down on the ground, boot on the head, a mask thrown over you, disoriented, handcuffed, thrown in the back of a truck, drove all around, taken into a shed, chained up against a wall, pulled up so that way you're kind of tippy-toeing on the wall, thrown back down on the ground, water on your face, pushed around, and you're going through this for quite a bit of time. And they're testing you to see how well you've learned everything.
What are the things they teach you there that is useful for you as a leader?
I guess number one, be useful. If you're going to get kidnapped, kidnappers they're kidnapping you for a reason, right? It could be a financial kidnapping, it could be a political kidnapping, especially if it's a financial kidnapping. Then if you're not useful to them, they will just get rid of you, basically, right? But if you can provide useful information, you're kidnapping me in my hotel room, go into the safe. That's where all the money and all the jewelry is. Oh, here, take my credit card, call this number, and you'll get. The more useful you can be to them, they're not going to want to hurt you. They're not going to want to actually, get rid of you. So that's one big thing. Don't try to get into an ego competition with them. These people have all the power. And if you start getting sarcastic or snarky or trying to be a tough guy back with them, it's not going to bode well for you. So be very nice, be very humble about everything. Try to build as much of a rapport and a connection with them. Talk about your family. Talk about, if you have kids, talk about your kids. If you, say your own name, say their name if you catch their name. So that way they're not just seeing you as some sort of autonomous object, but as a real person with a real background that they may have empathy for.
I love what you're saying because it's kind of borderline controversial, and I love it, that even with people that are obviously really not well-intended, humanity, empathy is the solution.
Exactly, yeah. I think so much of the problems that we're facing in the world, and this does go back to my research, is because of this sort of when I say dehumanized, what I mean is almost mechanistic. When we see each other as objects, that pawns in a game, that if I do this to you, then my side will win, but you might do this to me. And when we treat each other in this very, like we're just automatons, we're robots, we're machines, that's where the problem arises from. And even funny enough, I think whether we're talking about authoritarian leaders, fascist leaders around the world, or whether we're talking about violent extremist groups, one of the things that the common theme that they all have, all extremists all over the world, there is one thing they all criticize about the West in particular, which is what they see as too much of a mechanistic worldview, an instrumental worldview. And they'll use everything from science to business as an example of how we lack community, we lack spirituality, we lack connection with the sacred, we lack community and identity. And all we're doing is we're seeing the world as just one giant instrument, whether we're instrumentalizing each other or whether we're instrumentalizing even the environment and taking advantage of the environment. We're instrumentalizing everything and therefore dehumanizing it. And so much of what we're seeing is a reaction to instrumentalism. And so whether we're talking, and I think a lot of my work, whether we're talking about, how to get out of a kidnapping situation, how to handle a conflict negotiation, how to run a business, or how to actually prevent violent extremism, it's to get over this instrumentalist mentality.
It's fascinating because it sounds like what you're saying is those fascist extremist groups, while they obviously have a very damageful solution, the diagnostic is pretty accurate.
I agree. Yeah. If you hear like the full pitch of some of these groups when they're trying to radicalize people, you would probably go, I agree with a lot of that. It's the solution that's the problem.
If we try to be responsible as leaders about owning the diagnostic while wanting to stand for a humane solution into running a business in a non-instrumental way, how would that look like?
That's a hard one because there's a way you can do it that I don't approve of, which I think is the way a lot of businesses do work. And I've worked in private industry as well. And for example, it's very trendy or common to use languages like family languages, like we're a family, we do the things. Okay, yeah, but a family doesn't fire you if you don't hit your sales targets in the quarter, right? So I find that incredibly manipulative, and I don't like that. And I think people recognize that too. And I think it comes off as insincere and dishonest because on some level, if it's a business, this is a transactional relationship, right? I am selling you my time and my energy and my talents for you to give me back financial resources. And we cannot deny the fact that that's what this relationship ultimately is about. It is a transactional relationship. And to start using some of this family language, I just find it to be both. I think it turns people off, and I have a problem with it, just on an ethical level, to be honest.
Yeah. And so, what would be your even if it's idealistic for now, like vision about what would be an alternative you will be comfortable with?
I'm hesitant to give like a bullet pointed answer of you can do all of these things. I have a bullet point that I could give, but I'm hesitant to do it because that's the second part of the journey. And I think the first part needs to come first, which is the personal transformation of the leaders themselves. Let's just put business aside for a second. Why is the US, the UK, different countries spent a lot of money in training the Iraqi military after they came in and took over the country? They spent a lot of effort training the Afghan national military after they took over the country. Huge amounts of money training everything. Now, those militaries collapsed within days when the Taliban or when ISIS approached. And this was a conundrum to everyone, saying after all the effort that we put into, after all the training, after everything that we provided, why did they collapse so easily? And there's a multifactorial answer for it, but one important factor that came out clearly, because I interviewed some of these people, is they said, why would I be willing to make all these costly sacrifices and be what we call a devoted actor? A devoted actor is someone who's willing to make costly sacrifices. If my leaders aren't devoted actors, if I perceive them as rational actors, I'm going to become a rational actor. So before I start giving solutions in a bullet-pointed, step-by-step way, the leader themselves needs to go on a journey. They need to go on a quest themselves and say, am I actually a devoted actor? Because if you're a transactional leader, if you're a rational actor yourself, if you even follow my bullet-pointed list, it's going to be obvious who you are, and it's not going to work. it's going to be useless. Any advice I give you will be useless.
Give us a sense of what a leader that is a devoted actor sounds like, feels like, is like.
Yeah. So, you can use negative examples. You can use the Bin Ladens. You can use the, Che Guevara's, whoever it is, I know a lot of people like to wear him on their T-shirts, but he did a lot of bad things as well. So whatever you may think about his political ideology. But, Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King Jr. were all devoted actors too. So devoted actors can be both positive and negative. What they all have in common is they're willing to give their lives for their beliefs at the political level. Obviously, a business leader isn't going to do that, and I don't expect them to do that. But using this sort of more extreme example, if I can, these are people who genuinely believed in whatever they were saying, right? This was not about them. This was about their ideals. This was about the vision. And the vision and the ideals were more important to them. It transcended even their own well-being, their own lives. And so we call these things sacred values. These values that are non-fungible with the profane. They can't be traded off for material incentives. You can't, buy it off of someone with good incentives, with material incentives, with money, with raises, with whatever else. They're willing to make whatever costly sacrifices, including giving their own lives for their beliefs. And so again, a business leader is not going to be a Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela. But the question that I would ask them is, what is that vision? And be honest with yourself. Is it just that you just want to make a lot of money? Is it that you're just in it for status? Okay, you're a rational actor if that's the case. You're a transactional leader. And be honest about the fact that you're a transactional leader and have a transactional relationship with your employees and give them good rational reasons to work for you. But if you want to inspire that next level of creativity, of ambition, of passion in your employees, then you need to transition from that mindset. You need to have a clear vision that matters to you so much that you're willing to make those costly sacrifices.
It relates for me in the business world into two concepts. One is the concept of finding a vision, mission, and purpose for your company. And the second one is being authentic as a leader. Right? Sometimes it's like the purpose is very straightforward and simple. Sometimes it's as well like we see more and more new forms of companies like steward ownership that aim to use some of the benefits for a cause, right? That can be environmental, it can be social. So there is, I think, a big wake up of the new generation craving for more meaning, right? And it sounds like businesses may have a role to play in our society, into maybe not fully replacing the Gandhis and the Nelson Mandelas, but to at least get away from denying our humanity.
I think purpose is incredibly important for a meaningful life, for meaning in life. I'm also a little concerned with how purpose has been manipulated in popular culture. Your purpose doesn't have to be your profession. And I think what we've done with our jobs and with our careers is similar to what we did with romantic relationships over the course of the 20th century, right? Before you had these vast communities where you would have different parts of yourself satisfied from different individuals, from your extended family, the clergy, the elders, etc. And now all of a sudden, this one person, your romantic partner, has to be your best friend, your therapist, your confidant, your partner in crime. They're providing you with romance, all this stuff, all in one person. It's just too much for any one person to handle. And I think we've done a little bit that with career. It's going to be my identity. It's going to be my source of income. It's going to be my purpose. It's going to do all of these things for me. I'm going to put everything, all my eggs into that basket. Some people are able to find that professionally, and that's fine if they are, but it doesn't have to be. And you can find a lot of things like sense-making, for example, separate from purpose. They don't have to always come together. You can have identity even separate from your purpose as well. It doesn't have to be one and the same.
I love what you're saying because it's informing leaders listening to us around their employees. Would you agree or disagree maybe to the fact that maybe vision, mission, and purpose is a bit more important when you are at an executive level of a company because you're holding the company's vision and purpose. Like, for instance, if my company is about actually wanting to change how leaders behave, that's a purpose that is really, really motivating for me. As the leader of my company, I'm not sure I would find as much success if I didn't hold it in my whole body. Maybe someone working down the line in the company at a technical operational level for a specific thing doesn't have to fully relate with that purpose. But hey, better if they think, hey, that little brick I'm putting is contributing to that bigger purpose somehow. I'm playing a part in this and I can relate with this vision, or at least I don't feel an internal contradiction from my values to what the company is accomplishing.
Yeah. I agree with that. But just like in politics, political leaders need to have a great vision, but they also do need to engage in real politic, right? Which is they need to make compromises. They have different stakeholders who they need to satisfy. And I think what causes what I'm trying to get at is what can make your employees lose that belief in yourself. You may feel that you have vision, mission, and purpose, but if they don't believe that you have it, it's not going to really matter. Part of that authenticity means acknowledging the real politic element of it, right? Because if you have to go to your shareholders, you may have all the vision, mission, and purpose, but you have to go to your shareholders and explain to them, maybe why we didn't make, we didn't hit our targets, or what we're going to do to hit our targets, or they're putting pressure on you to change things, and maybe it doesn't always fit your vision, mission, and purpose, but you need to, make some compromise in order to stay in this position, in order to continue to guide things overall in the right direction. I think acknowledging the fact that those are real constraints is also important. I think where a lot of political leaders, for example, lose their credibility is that they speak all this about all these big values. They go out there, they give these speeches, and maybe they even hold a lot of it in a sincere way. But nonetheless, they have to acquiesce. They have to compromise. This goes back to the German philosopher Max Weber. He said, anybody who has a penchant for politics needs to be able to balance what he called value rationality and instrumental rationality. Value rationality is, what are my values, and I have to stay committed to it. Instrumental rationality is, how do I get things done? And who do I need to ally with, and what compromises do I need to make? If you go too far down the direction of instrumental rationality, you're seen as having no values, and people won't support you because you're now just weak and you're someone who's just going to engage in this transactional behavior. If you're too value-driven, then you're probably going to fail because you're not able to actually get things done. You're not able to make those compromises and work with other people and build coalitions. So you need to be able to find that exact balance between instrumental rational thinking and value rational thinking. So while value, missions, purpose, all of this stuff is really important, anybody, any leader, whether they're a political leader or a business leader, also has to engage in instrumental thinking. What they can't do and where they lose their credibility is where they pretend like they're not doing the instrumental thinking.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Nafis. We'll move to the next section now.
Sure.
In the second part, Nafis, we're more interested about you as a leader going through challenges. What might be a current leadership edge you would like to explore together?
So we're going through a very interesting time politically. The project that I'm on is a very well-funded project by the UK Foreign Office, a huge employee base for a research project. Previously, I was worked on a similar project that was very large, that was funded by the US government. Things are changing now, largely because of the current US administration. Behavioral and social science funding that works in the areas that I work in, conflict resolution, peace building, violent extremism, reducing violent conflict, that money has been shut off pretty much across the board because of the United States current administration. So the money isn't there from the normal funding sources. But it's even had a downstream effect on European countries, specifically even the UK. because there's been a push to say, well, all of these countries need to meet their minimum NATO funding, which I also agree with, that they do need to meet that minimum NATO funding. But that money has to come from somewhere. And so money is being moved around all over the place, money that was normally involved in things like international aid and so forth. A lot of the funds that have funded me are being moved into different directions, including towards ministries of defense and the like. So now I'm in a challenge because the current project I'm working on is coming to an end in 2027. And the issue is going to be, okay, well, we need to go out there to these governments and get this large sum of funding again, and perhaps even larger with an even bigger team with hundreds of people working on it across the world. But the normal sources for funding aren't there. So now you need to go to other parts of the government. It could potentially be the defense sector or something like that you have to go to get this funds. Now, this puts me in an awkward situation, because when you go to a government and you ask for money, you have to be able to convince them that the research that I'm doing is ultimately aligned to some degree with the interests of what you're doing as a particular unit within government. Now, this can create a clash of values, essentially, right? I am not here as an independent researcher to spend my time and energy to tell these countries how to engage in military spending or military efforts, or how to bolster their military activities. I refuse to do that. There's no way I'm going to do that, right? I'm a peace builder, and if anything, I think probably a lot of the militaristic adventurism of Western countries has created the very problems that we're in. So there's a balance between my values of what I want to research and what I think is important, and at the same time having to explain to governments why this research is really important for them, given the fact that right now they're in a very militaristic mindset in terms of probably mostly defensively, funding national security, worried about Russia, China, things like that. So for me, that's the issue.
I see. So would I translate it correctly? Tell me how much it resonates or not, and incorrect if needed. That you're in between the concrete need of funding without compromising your values.
Exactly.
Okay. So I have a little game here.
Okay.
Let's see if it helps you. Right? So those are stress cards. Maybe some of those cards can help you open up a little bit. So you see there is a color code. The cards in gray are what we call meta source of stress. In red, it's sources of stress. In yellow, you will have modulators of the stress response. And in blue, signs and symptoms, right? So just go through them. If you want with your intuition, just pick maybe pick a few that you feel when you talk about this topic, right?
I have living in values incongruence and lack of control over destiny.
With your intuition, which one you would like to double click on?
Let's say living in values incongruence.
Yeah. Reading that card, what does it evoke you first?
Well, I'm not living on a personal level in any sort of value incongruence. It's more, I'm trying to find the congruence, right? I'm trying to find the congruence of what it is that I think what the world needs from me, right? Like, what is the thing that I can uniquely work on and study and contribute to that will be of real value, versus the fact that, again, it's the realpolitik thing, right? The fact that my sources of funding for these things they have their own priorities that may not always align with mine. And to some degree, they're never going to align, because what I do is to criticize the mainstream and the establishment and try to be a critical friend of saying, this is where we are now, and here's where I think we should be. And not in a way that's destructive, but in a way that, at least when I communicate it to people, they understand and they agree with. But it's going to be hard to at least get the sources of funding, because they're currently in that mentality that I'm trying to get them out of.
What would it mean for you to be able to convince them, not just to give you the money, but to actually see the value in what you're doing, the way you're doing it, which means having them accepting criticism.
On an emotional, interpersonal level, it would be nice to see that they're accepting that criticism. But there's a difference between them accepting it and them also doing something about it, right? Because it's very easy to go in and say all sorts of critical things, and people go, "Yeah, I totally agree. That makes a lot of sense," and then they don't change anything. To see the actual change, it would be amazing. It's why I do this.
It sounds like maybe for the first time, you have to apply what you have been recommending for other countries, something for the own people that would probably be the ones that need to hire you.
Yes. It's a balance of like you're saying, like that authenticity. If you try to sell people what you think they want, it's probably not going to be something very interesting. I think there is something to be said about going in and presenting something that they weren't even expecting, and that it's authentic and that it has integrity and it has your signature on it. At the same time, there is that realpolitik. You do need to couch it in their language. You need to explain to them or help them explain to their superiors why this fits the overall priorities of that administration.
So if you would use that short conversation we're having to help you with that challenge, what would you like to get out of our short talk? What would be a good, realistic and satisfying outcome of a short brainstorm together around that?
I guess being able to accept that finding a way to use language that will appeal to the donor does not mean that I'm being inauthentic.
It looks like something is happening to you emotionally as you're saying this.
Yeah.
What chord is being hit right now?
Well, I think it's just the honesty of it, right? The honesty, the awareness of what needs what needs to be done. Allowing that to sink in, I guess that's the overall feeling. Feeling of sinking in.
Yeah, the acceptance of something that is currently not so easy to accept.
Yeah.
What's in the way so far between where you are right now,
yes,
and where you want to be, which means in a state of acceptance? Talk to us about the path.
Yeah, I think I have a strong attachment to authenticity. My favorite play growing up was Cyrano de Bergerac, and it was all about I will go hungry before I give up my integrity. So that's a very strong value of mine. I will give up my life for my integrity, and I don't want to do anything or that I feel like is going to challenge my integrity. And so for me, it's about understanding that I can probably present things in a way to donors that appeals to them, that gives them the opportunity to be able to justify giving me the funds, that is not challenging my own integrity. And I have to be honest, because we can easily lie to ourselves. Right? Like I know as a cognitive scientist how easy it is for me to convince myself, no, but I've maintained my integrity when in reality I didn't.
Beautiful. Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing this. And I'm wondering what it would sound like if you could actually not just be in full integrity, but taking them backstage, explaining to them what you are doing. So, listen, that's my full integrity. And at the same time, I know that I need to convince you. So as I understand how the brain works, this is what I'm going to use with you right now to convince you to give me while my full integrity is there. And just try bluntly this approach. How does it resonate? Something like that.
to go to the donors and basically say, this is what I want to do. tell me what I have to say to get your funding. You know, it depends on your relationship, I would say, with some of the program officers. I actually think that if you have a decent relationship with some of them individually, you actually can have that honest of a conversation. Because these are also people who are themselves critical. You know, despite whatever people will say about the deep state cabal, et cetera, most of the people that I've met, senior civil servants and so forth, do have a self-awareness and a challenge. I mean, part of the reason why they fund research is because they like to fund people who do have that independence of thought and who do challenge them. But you also have to build up a close enough relationship with those people to make them feel comfortable enough to be able to have that honest of a conversation with.
So it sounds like maybe the deeper issue here is the current state of the relationship and how the nature of the current relationship with them.
Not with my current source of funders.
Okay.
I have a good relationship with them. I could have an honest conversation.
Yeah.
But given where I think all the funding is going to go, I don't even know those people. I don't even know their names. So I would have to build those relationships.
Yeah. And how does it sound to have to build those relationships?
Well, it sounds great. I'm a social person, and so that's actually one of the things that I wanted to do anyways, was just to go and meet those people, talk to them, build those relationships.
So it sounds like it's more an internal work that you're talking about in terms of this challenge, right? To sit with what is the boundary of what's okay for me to do or not to keep my integrity in this game.
Yes, I guess the thing is, what I'm particularly aware of is how good our minds are at lying to us, right? How easy it could be to convince myself that I haven't given up my integrity when in reality I have.
So what would be a system you could put in place now to evaluate then how much you kept your integrity or not?
Can I actually just a thought that just came to me that I would like to actually bring up. Maybe part of the issue is my own perception of what integrity is, right? If I perceive integrity as something that is totally uncompromising, then I need to be totally uncompromising, right? But again, if I take my own advice that I gave earlier, which is, as Max Weber said, you're not going to get anything done if you don't engage in some degree of instrumental thinking, and that it's okay to engage in that, but you're honest about the fact that you're engaging in it and that you're doing it for the purpose of the value. That's a very different, you're not compromising on the value. You're engaging in instrumental reasoning in order to achieve the value. And as long as you're open about it, honest about it, clear with yourself and other people, and you're not lying to yourself, then there's probably no integrity lost. In fact, trying to find a way where I'm holding on to that integrity without any instrumental thinking at all might actually have less integrity in an ironic way.
Beautiful. How could you anchor what you just said so you get ready within the next 2 years for what's coming for you?
One way to anchor it is to, I think, to put it out there, you know, and to talk to people much more openly about it. I think once, because I already know like roughly a team of people that I'd want to take with me over to that new project, and to be able to have maybe more explicit conversations with them as opposed to holding it within myself and having to feel like I have to do it all on my own, but to share my thinking and to hear their feedback and to, and to use them as sounding boards as well.
I want to try something, Nafis. Do you care that we change seats for a second?
Sure.
All right. So here you are, Nafis, in front of yourself, right? You're the expert.
All right.
And you have someone that is radicalizing, which is your field of expertise. Mm-hmm. And is talking to you about needing to be uncompromised about their belief system and in full integrity with anything less than perfect means I'm compromising myself. How would you talk them through integrating a little bit more of instrumentalism?
I think the main thing, what I find, is that people's values are quite general. And the specifics actually have a degree of flexibility. So I would just ask a lot of questions. Okay, so tell me what the values are. And then let them see how many different ways they can actually manifest that value. So that way they see there's not just one way, that there's actually 10 different ways or 20 different ways. And then I think, well, that would be step one, was just to realize that there's the value and then there's the actions, and that there's multiple actions that are still consistent with that value.
Pick 1, 2, or 3 open questions you would ask.
Well, I would say, like, what is your value? What is your primary sacred value, your moral conviction?
Okay, that's one.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
You want to come back here and answer that question?
Sure. Yeah, I would say intellectual honesty. I think the value that science brings generally to the world is the fact that it can help us question some of our assumptions. And I think that there's this it's making the invisible visible. And I think so much of the problems that we're facing right now is because of some sort of invisible assumptions that we have about humanity and about how to move towards peace. And I want to help people become more aware of what those invisible assumptions are and to question and challenge some of them.
But what are yours?
What are my invisible assumptions?
And really regarding this issue you're facing, right?
Yeah.
Because that's the purpose of these short segments together.
Think about it this way. What's the story that I'm telling myself that is maybe blocking me? The idea is that any use of language that is not the exact language I use in my own head when thinking about things somehow lacks integrity. If I use another set of language, if I use the kind of language that the donor themselves would prefer to have used, that's one big thing that's a block for me.
Okay. What do you want to do about it?
I want to get over it. Yeah. That I can use that language with them because that's what needs to be used in order to get the funds. But at the same time, I'm not beholden to just that language. And to be fair, in my own experiences with funding, the language you use in the contract, the language you use in the funding applications, you're not beholden in your media appearances, in your op-ed writing, in your books, in your articles to use that same set of language. Right, those are two different audiences, and they generally don't get too involved in being a police with your language.
I'm curious, Nafis, what would be a way for you to, while you're using this language in the room with them, the donors, still feel like you're being authentic?
I think probably to also use the language that I would use as well. And to use both sets of language.
Interesting.
Yeah.
How would that work?
I would say what I would want to say, exactly as I would say it in my own head. And then there would just be sort of the add-on of, like, in essence, like, here's another way of saying it that uses the exact language that they would want to use.
Sounds like something is happening in you, like a relief I'm sensing.
Yes. For sure, yeah. No, that's a good way forward with with thinking of how to navigate the situation.
So what could be like a small commitment you take to yourself in order to try that a little bit? Like, is there an opportunity for you to exercise, practice this, and see how it lands and keep adjusting?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would start with actually meeting one of the people that I need to meet, and at least on the first meeting, potentially just stay within my own language, for example. Just keep it there. And to get their reaction and to see, especially if it's an informal meeting, in a coffee house or something like that, I'd be like, all right, let's just talk. This is what I'm thinking. You tell me what parts of this resonate with the kinds of things that you can or cannot fund. And oftentimes I find that they will then bring up the language themselves. And it's in those moments you have to listen very sharply, because while they're speaking, sometimes almost it'll seem like in a casual way, they're actually just giving you the key words in what they're saying, right? They're giving you the cheat code.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Nafis.
No worries.
All right, Nafis, how was that conversation for you?
It was good. I'm ready to cry and go to my therapist. And no, it was good. It was good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was good to think about that out loud.
Yeah, you make that joke and still you're talking about your emotions. Like something is happening.
Of course. Yeah. No, it's one of those things that's like weighing on me, and I've kept it in my head, and so it's very nice to put it out there and to talk about it, and to think it through. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's nice also for me to realize myself sort of like how important my integrity actually is.
Mm-hmm.
What's funny is like it's actually a big part of our research as well. Is this idea of is a kind of trauma? It's called moral injury, and moral injury is when people feel like they violated their own values. Either they did something that they didn't want to do morally, or someone in their own in-group that someone who they were supposed to trust did something that they felt like was morally wrong, or it was a leader that betrayed them. And this creates a fissure. It can create a fissure between you, your community, your leadership, and it's called moral injury. And it's almost a type of trauma that gets created. And it's like the number one thing that we're seeing across the world for why people become disaffected, why people drop out of movements, why people drop out of society. It can lead to anxiety and depression. People sometimes think trauma has to be something more physical, but actually it can be moral as well. And so it's funny to hear me say out loud this thing that I haven't experienced any sort of moral injury, but it's the thing that I'm very cognizant of not experiencing and not wanting to experience. And it's ironic that also in all of my research that I'm realizing just how important this is as an issue.
What would be a message you would send to business leaders out there to make sure that they own their responsibility in not creating moral injuries?
Part of it is that they need to realize just how important it actually is. I don't think even I realized until we started collecting the data. Yeah, I remember like a lot of these movements, a variety of movements. I mean, you can talk about authoritarian populist movements, you can talk about violent extremist movements. A word that people would constantly say was, oh, the hypocrisy. And I just sort of ignored it for the longest time because I always thought like, I mean, that's hardly the most evil vice, especially for like the things that I study, right? I study people who are really doing some of the most evil things out there. Hypocrisy is not like the worst thing that they're doing. And so I thought, well, that's not. I just kind of ignored it. And then it took me a while to realize everywhere I go in the world, whether it's supporters of authoritarian populists, whether it's leftist guerrillas, whether it's jihadists, whether it's white nationalists, whatever it is, that's the thing that everyone seems to continue to go back to. Is this say-do gap, this moral value that you're saying you have, and the fact that you're actually violating it. It's really something very deep within our psychology to feel like that is something completely unacceptable, to break that trust and to violate those moralities, those moral values that one can hold. You may think that hypocrisy is just some ordinary vice, but it's not. And the higher you move up in leadership, the more important it is to not be a hypocrite. And if you do engage in it, it can not only make people lose trust in you, it can actually lead to trauma amongst your employees, your followers, and can fissure the relationship you have with them.
From a place of empathy for leaders, maybe listening to this and getting a bit curious, what would be a first step for them to get that a bit more in their awareness?
But also take a long, hard look at yourself, and also like, how do other people see you? The big value add that I noticed that myself and certain colleagues of mine were bringing to the world. We're the rare people who were talking to people on the ground and getting their actual insights and then presenting it to leaders, saying, this is what your people actually think about you. Is there a way you can genuinely hear those voices, presented back to you in a way where you're going to get honest answers. Because there's also so many ways in which you're not going to get honest answers too.
If you were to do as a consultancy, for instance, for a company yourself, with the way you're conducting things currently, go in a company and try to collect the most honest feedback possible, what would you put in place in order to guarantee honesty? Because a lot of employees as well, despite the fact it's confidential, and a lot of times it is absolutely confidential, but they still be like, I'm not sure how it's going to be used. I'm going to be recognized. When I conduct 360 assessments with leaders, there is always a reflex. And I know how well-intended all leaders I coach are. One of the first reflex of most of them is, I think this comes from that person, right? To attribute it. So it's interesting because there's this curiosity to know who it comes from. And I think it's feeding the distrust of, I'm going to be recognized, right? How would you conduct a survey for a leader to learn more about themselves, or for an executive team to know more about how the company resonates with their employees?
Sometimes the approach needs to be a bit more indirect. Because like you're saying, if you just ask people in a very direct way, it's going to be influenced by all sorts of things. Not just they're going to know it's me, but even things like social desirability. What is the kind of answer I think I should be giving, given my vision of who I am as well, right? So it's very difficult to find ways around that. We have a bunch of tools and techniques that we've developed in the political arena to try to be less direct. It's a very Western thing to be very direct, like just tell me how you feel, and to expect the person to be vulnerable. As you know, in the Middle East, people don't talk that way. Things come out in very indirect ways. I mean, some of the tools that we use, for example, is we don't even ask people questions. We just show pictures kind of like a little bit like we did. Here's a bunch of pictures, and just tell me a story about each of them. And then in the story, the message will sometimes come out as they're telling these stories. So that's just like one technique that can be utilized. But it requires a researcher on the other end of it to be able to actually know, okay, that's the part of the story that's actually really interesting. That's a pattern that I'm noticing that different people are telling.
Yeah.
And then to be able to then analyze it and then say, this is what I think it means, and to interpret it.
A cousin of mine, when she was interviewing people to join her company, she would take the person to a restaurant and she would observe how the person would behave with the waiters. Because that's a moment where probably they were not as aware that they are being evaluated.
I guess the thing is, like, as much as I am a scientist, where I realize a lot of data collection and analysis is equally an art form as it is as it is a science, which means you also have to adapt it to who you are as the individual researcher. What is your skill set? How do people perceive you? And how is your, what we would call, positionality affecting the answers that are being given? We have these surveys that we ask our enumerators to go out and collect, and then we'll look at, like, does the gender of the enumerator themselves affect? We see a steady pattern of differences in answers depending on the gender or the age or the ethnicity of the enumerator, and it oftentimes does. So to some degree, you can't really get rid of these kinds of biases. The thing is, how do you acknowledge it? How do you take it into account? And how do you treat it almost like an art form?
One of the great ways to get sometimes a bit more of the truth with people you manage is changing the environment, having an informal moment outside for a walk. I think we're conditioned as well, like you said, to answer a certain persona when we are, for instance, in a meeting room at the office, right? Which comes with a lot of other associations.
We went off on this track because we're talking about this idea of hypocrisy, right?
Yeah.
And being able to make sure that you're closing that say-do gap, and being aware of the fact that, people may perceive a moral hypocrisy or hypocrisy of any kind, even if you think you're not being hypocritical. And so I think that's ultimately the issue. And to some degree, people not only, especially in the arenas that I work in, not only do people sometimes perceive hypocrisy, In the arenas that I work in, you have a bunch of malign influencers and malign actors who are actively trying to create a perception of hypocrisy, even when it's not there. Right? So you have to be able to operate in a situation even when people are perceiving it. I think what I'm trying to get at here is you can't always control what everybody thinks, but you certainly can control your own behavior and what you think. And I think there's just, the most important thing is that you realize how important that hypocrisy actually is, how corrosive that actually is, how much of a downstream impact that has on whatever organization or whatever entity that you're actually running. And to just be aware of the fact that our brains are so good at convincing ourselves that we're not being hypocrites. Like we're so good at lying to ourselves. And again, it's just first and foremost accepting the fact that you probably aren't seeing your own hypocrisy, that is probably a blind spot. And like any blind spot, if you acknowledge that it's there, try to look in the direction of the blind spot. I think that would be the main takeaway.
Beautiful, Nafis. Thank you so much. To close this episode, I'm going to give you a prompt that I give to everyone. Very simple. One sentence to finish. Leadership is?
I would say leadership is having a vision and having the integrity to follow through on the actions that vision demands.
Thank you very much, Nafis. A pleasure to have you here.
Pleasure to be here.
We often think about leadership as all about the vision, while leadership is also about precision. Here's your next challenge. Zoom in on one behavior you repeat at work, a tone you use, a phrase you say often, a way you run a specific meeting. Then ask yourself, what message does that micro behavior send? What permission does it give? What standard does it set? Then make one small tweak, just one. Tiny changes can lead to important results. This is how cultures shift, not through slogans, rather through repeated patterns. Shift one, and you'll start shifting the whole.